all of a sudden the law is not really useful. Say we make decisions if the costs are greater than the benefits, ceteris paribus. And intuitively, this doesn't really make sense. Normally, you want to make a decision, you make a rational decision, if the benefits are either equal to or greater than the cost. My name is Manal Zihani, and my article is about generalized laws in the social sciences. So I specifically talk about it in the context of economics, and the terminology that we use in economics is ceteris paribus laws. So the problem that I tackled in my article, or that I tried to approach, is an issue in the philosophy of economics, and more broadly in the epistemology of economics, which relates to triviality or vacuity and also false generalizations. It's a problem that occurs in these laws because of their structure. So essentially, when we have ceteris paribus laws, they function as clauses which contain assumptions which are not necessarily explicated. So for instance, you can have a clause, a popular one in economics is the law of demand. And you would say the law of demand holds ceteris paribus. And in that ceteris paribus, there are certain implied assumptions, mostly that certain conditions are met or certain conditions have to be met. And that can be a problem because what can occur are something called false generalizations. There can be instances in which that law, quote unquote law, does not actually hold. And if you really want to sort of dig it down deeper and break it down in like a semantic sense, you can have an issue of vacuity arise, or you can say the statement becomes vacuous because in that sort of clause, ceteris paribus, you can list all these different conditions or assumptions which will make that law true. And that's a problem because all of a sudden the law is not really useful. You could say, okay, well, the example that I use in my article is, say we make decisions if the costs are greater than the benefits, ceteris paribus. And intuitively, this doesn't really make sense. Normally, you want to make a decision, you make a rational decision, if the benefits are either equal to or greater than the costs. But if you have the right conditions, if you have the right assumptions, that can still be true. So I discussed a few approaches that we can use to answer this question. The one that I ended up settling with, or the one that I thought was the most useful, was approaching it from the perspective of normality. That is, instead of calling them laws, which is terminology that we see more often in the natural sciences, like say the law of inertia or Newton's laws or whatever, is to express them as norms. So to say, okay, normally we act this way, normally we see this kind of behavior, normally in the economy or in a society, people tend to act this way. And that's not only easier, but it's also, I think, much useful to lay people. Because for economists, it's not really a problem. They're, of course, very aware of their science, they're very aware of their study, and they know when they make a certain claim, they have to account for all the possible problems. For instance, it's the problem of endogeneity, and you see this brought up a lot, and economists are very strict about elucidating that they've tried to account for every single possible instance, everything that could affect their model, that could affect the structure of their argument. Whereas for lay people, you know, we don't normally engage with that kind of the sort of hard science of economics, or the hard social sciences. And it can be kind of misleading because, you know, we're told that this certain behavior or this clause is a law, or that people act this way, or that they should act this way. And we make a lot of, you know, interesting assumptions. We make a lot of really strong claims in saying, well, no, that doesn't make sense because economics says it's a law that people tend to act this way. But we have plenty of evidence that shows that that's not always the case. This especially became apparent with behavioral economics, which economics sort of took a more psychological approach, you could say. And they demonstrated that, well, there's a lot of factors that influence our decisions that may not necessarily be intuitive or follow what we tend to classify as rational behavior. So yeah, it's really, my article is directed towards the way we speak about economics, the way that we express ideas, not just economics, but in the social sciences broadly, the way that we express ideas, the way that we express concepts, laws, theories, etc.